And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, life, while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 43. I'm not quite sure because I don't have the number in front of me. Our weeks got kind of crazy. Where we're going to talk about a book and a quote that Matt was given and devoured and see where the conversation goes. But first, do you have a coffee?
Yeah, I made my own blend this morning.
Yeah.
I was actually planning on being at your house this week, so
yeah.
I bought the Terra Nova that I promised.
Oh.
And hopefully by the next time we meet at your house, I won't have drunk all the Terra Nova. Actually, I'm going to Keene today, where that coffee is based.
There you go.
Because I have to get my window replaced, and I think I'm just going to buy another pound, and that way, one way or another, I'll have that coffee for us.
Yeah, I was going to say, you could also buy me a pound, and I can Venmo you.
Yeah.
And that way, it would be like, this is Nate's, I can't drink it.
No, I'm always buying coffee, so one of these times it'll just happen. But I blended the Terra Nova Brazil with the Mocha Joe's Peru, and of course it's excellent. Because
yeah.
those are excellent companies, and I'm an excellent coffee maker.
Yeah.
So,
and for those listeners, you can probably hear that we're remote again. My week got out of control, and Matt very generously switched times and days and agreed to do this over Zoom. So,
yeah, but Nate, your week got out of control in a good way, I think.
Yeah. Like lots of catering events and positive job things, and it's also last Friday was Zach's birthday. Today is Karis's birthday. They're exactly a week apart. We haven't done birthday parties because COVID, so we're having a big party for Karis tomorrow, and there's been sports and doctor's appointments, like good doctor's appointments, like Sebastian had his physical, and just everywhere I looked, there was like another event popping up on my Google Calendar.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
So I am drinking Dunkin' Donuts cold brew because Shirley, she brought Sebastian to school today and just brought one home for me. So I was gonna have something fancier, but I'm not gonna turn a gift horse. I'm not gonna look a gift horse in the mouth. There it is.
I don't think I know that one. I don't think I know that cliche.
Oh, really? Yeah, I almost made a misanthrope, but I caught myself. Yeah, I think it's like, you often inspect the teeth and mouth of a horse to determine its health and viability, and so it's like, if it's a gift, don't inspect it and like be super judgmental about it. Just say thank you.
Oh, yes. I should know that. My dad was a horse trainer.
Oh, really?
Or most of his career.
Huh.
I guess it's one of those things, you either take up what your dad did with gusto,
yeah,
or you just completely go another direction.
It's true. Yeah.
And I've also heard, in terms of who you choose to marry, you probably heard this before, you either marry your mother or you marry the opposite of your mother.
Yeah. Yeah, I was always the opposite guy.
Yeah, I think I'm the opposite too.
Yeah.
So today's topic, since you agreed to it and didn't let me get into it before...
I know, I agreed blindly.
we recorded. Today's topic is nothingness, suicide, and what's the point of even living?
So we should put a trigger warning in the...
Yeah, I think so. But, it's not going to be too specific.
Yeah.
In terms of, it's more abstract. It's that question with which, it is philosophy, it's existentialism. It's the question that Camus begins Myth of Sisyphus which is, Well, it's not so much a question as it is this really radical statement where he says the only true philosophical question is why not commit suicide? I think that this book, and particularly this quote, explores that. The name of the book is Sunset Limited. It was gifted to me. Speaking of gifts, it was gifted to me by my friend Thomas. So if you're listening, Thomas, thank you. I read it in 2 days. It's not that long. It's not a difficult read, at least technically, although the themes are, nothingness, suicide, why be alive, and I don't know how much of the plot of the book I need to get into for the quote to be understandable. I'm just going to read the quote.
Okay. And just real quick, I just want to put out for our listeners, there is a national suicide hotline and crisis lifeline, and all you need to do is text 988. And I will find the phone number later on. But if you are struggling and need some help, 988 can direct you to some resources and some people who might be able to steer you in a direction that would give you some hope.
All right. Thanks, Nate. I appreciate that. So if the quote that I'm going to read requires context, I can go a little bit into the plot, but I want to read the quote, and before I do that, I just wanted to ask you, Nate, like, if you could relate to this train of thought.
Okay.
So, here's what this person says. I don't believe in God. Can you understand that? Look around you, man. Can't you see? The clamor and din of those in torment has to be the sound most pleasing to his ear. I loathe these discussions. The argument of the village atheist whose single passion is to revile endlessly that which he denies the existence of in the first place. Your fellowship, your Christian fellowship, is a fellowship of pain and nothing more. And if that pain were actually collective instead of simply reiterative, then the sheer weight of it would drag the world from the walls of the universe and send it crashing and burning through whatever night it might yet be capable of engendering until it was not even ash. And justice, brotherhood, eternal life, good God, man, show me a religion that prepares one for death, for nothingness. There's a church I might enter. Yours prepares one only for more life, for dreams and illusions and lies. If you could banish the fear of death from men's hearts, they wouldn't live a day. That's actually the money line right there. that got me thinking before I continue. So I'll just read it again. If you could banish the fear of death from men's hearts, they wouldn't live a day. Who would want this nightmare if not for fear of the next? The shadow of the axe hangs over every joy. Every road ends in death or worse. Every friendship, every love. Torment, betrayal, loss, suffering, pain, age, indignity, and hideous lingering illness, all with a single conclusion. For you and for everyone and everything that you have chosen to care for. There's the true brotherhood, the true fellowship, and everything is a member for life. You tell me that my brother is my salvation? My salvation? Well then damn him. Damn him in every shape and form and guise. Do I see myself in him? Yes, I do. And what I see sickens me. Do you understand me? Can you understand me?
Yeah, I think I resonate a lot with a lot of that. I would have to read it a few times because there were a few parts where I was like, no, but I don't want to interrupt him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that popped into my head, do you have HBO Plus at all? No. So, I'm sure you've heard of The Last of Us, though, right now. It's like the new big zombie. The third episode I've watched 3 times with various people because I've gotten more people into it, so I'm watching it again and again and again. Because like it's my kids' rest time, and they get to choose a show, and I'm just in the living room hanging out with them, so I watch it. I bawl my eyes out at the third episode multiple times. It is one of the most romantic, tragic love stories I've ever seen portrayed on television. And, you know, it's this post-apocalyptic world where fungus has taken over, very much like the ants that in the rainforest, where fungus can control them and it drags them to the nest and then their head explodes and it infects more ants. That's sort of like that fungus evolved to get humans, which is like a super realistic zombie thing.
Yeah, like you could imagine it.
Yes,
yeah.
like it is quite possible. Or I shouldn't say quite. There's a small probability that a fungus could evolve from these ants to jump into mammals to eventually jump into humans. Unlike, you know, The Walking Dead, which is... And so, like, these people are fighting to survive in this world where the zombies... Like, there's what's called QZ, which is quarantine zones. And those people got to safety, and they were able to escape. But every year, because of how fungus is, the quarantine zone gets a little bit smaller. Right? And in episode 3, Ron Swanson, the actor who is Ron Swanson, who still plays a Ron Swanson-esque character, he's like a prepper who it actually ends up like working in his favor. He has this room. Another guy wanders into his property essentially, and they end up falling in love. And spoiler alert! So the end of the episode, Ron Swanson's, and it's not Ron, it's Bill, and but his partner has a terminal disease. It appears like it's MS or something like that. That there is no cure, and there was no cure even before the zombie apocalypse. And so he decides one day, like, this is my last day on Earth. Like, that's it. So he tells Bill, like, this is what I want to do. I want to go to the boutique, because eventually they take over the whole town and, like, make a fortress. It's like, I want to go to the boutique, and I'm going to pick out whatever outfit I want for you, and you're going to wear it. And then you're going to make me my favorite meal. And then you're going to take these pills, and you're going to crush them into a Bordeaux, and I'm going to drink them. And you're going to bring me to bed, and I'm going to fall asleep. And I'm, like, tearing up now. So Bill does this all, and he opens the bottle of wine and he pours it, and his partner is like, is this enough? And he's like, oh yeah. And so he puts the crushed pills in his wine glass and pours the wine, and then he pours another glass for himself, and they're staring at each other, and the MS drinks it, and you see this like fear as well as relief because he's been suffering so much. And then Bill drinks his, and he's like, you put the pills in before you even opened the wine bottle in front of me, didn't you? And he's like, yes. And he's like, I don't approve of this. And Ron Swanson goes, this isn't the tragic suicide at the end of the play. He's like, I'm getting old, and you are my purpose. So we're going to go to bed together. And it's just like, I don't know, it's sort of off topic, but it just resonates, like, that just kept popping into my head. Like, you know, there are some religious fanatics, and then you have these people who are like gay atheists who at the end were like, yeah, it's time to stop fighting. Like, the world is a mess, and you are my person, and now that you're gone, I don't really give a rat's ass about these other people. Like,
yeah. Yeah, that... I don't say that throws a wrinkle into the discussion. I think it's another thing to think about.
Yeah.
If anything, yeah, it does throw a little bit of a wrinkle, just because I think the perspective of the person whose name is White, the quote that I read,
yeah,
the person who is White, I think their perspective is not romantic.
Sure.
I think he's sort of just decided that he really, really, truly believes that there's nothing after this life, and he believes that that's a good thing, like that not existing is better than existing.
Yeah, I mean, I can get behind that, especially in Afterlife. You know, so sort of the traditional 1800s hymn version of heaven, which we can discuss if that's accurate or not, of like ethereally floating around, sitting before God, singing to him for eternity. Like, how freaking boring. And then, the idea of eternal torment for people who didn't accept Jesus, like, wow, that's like harsh. And that's also very specific to Christianity. Like, in Islam, hell is temporary. In Mormonism, hell is temporary. Judaism is sort of a gray area on everything, right?
Yeah. Right.
Buddhism and Hinduism, the hell, like your character was talking about, is actually on Earth. and what you do is escape it. But again, you escape it into nothingness.
Right.
So, I think White is really railing against what I would say is the contemporary evangelical idea of afterlife. Now, I can also see, sort of his, like, if there's a God, he loves suffering and his burnt offerings are pain, because that's sort of the human condition. and yet most of us do trudge through it, which is insane. I was a while back, I was reading some psychology studies, and they said within 5 years of tragedy, like severe tragedy, like Ukraine level of tragedy, Syria level of tragedy, people readjust, and their level of happiness is the same as before. Now, that isn't for everybody, right? There are certainly people who have PTSD or who can't. But on average, human beings, 5 years after a terrible tragedy, report the same level of happiness as before the tragedy, which is also ridiculous.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that for White, the character in the book, I think that he just. Oh, this is what I was going to say. So one of the interesting things he says is, like, he talks about how, like, people talk about seeing their loved ones after seeing their loved ones again, and White's basically like, that's a terrifying proposition to me.
I can agree with that too.
Like, I didn't get along with them that well when I was on Earth.
Yeah.
Like, they died, and it was sad, but I also got closure.
Right.
And now you're going to reintroduce them to me. But now it's eternal.
Right. It never ends.
Now there's no narrative, there's no story, there's no end. It's just me and this kind of insufferable person.
Yeah.
Not to mention, like, he also mentions, like, he himself is an insufferable person. Like, to be with 24/7, so he's like, I have to live with myself and these people. So he's talking kind of like about the hell of eternity. It can be viewed as a kind of hell.
Yeah.
Especially if you can't imagine what that consists of. Even if you're not being lit on fire.
Right.
Because there's no, like, the idea of no finality. If you really think about that, I can see how that can be a terrifying thing.
Yeah. How many games of Monopoly can you play, or how many times can you watch The Last of Us? And there's this, when I was a Christian, I would think, like, because I do believe that the more accurate depiction of heaven in the Bible is that the world gets made new. So you're not floating around as this ethereal spirit angel thing. Like, you have a physical body and you're walking around the earth, and the earth is just better. But the earth isn't that big. Like, it is, but it isn't. And if you had eternity, like, you could get to everywhere relatively quickly in reference to eternity. Right? Like, even if it took 1 million years to visit every corner of Earth and do everything you ever wanted to do in life that you didn't get to do, you still have 1 million more years ad nauseum. And, like, it's like working at a call center.
Right.
but you can never escape.
You're like, what's gonna be my job? What am I gonna do? Like, how do you not get bored?
Yeah.
Even if things are perfect, even if people aren't insufferable, even if the human condition is not a part of the next world, you still like.
I mean, wouldn't it be?
You still actually have no idea. I could infinitely ask questions about what the afterlife is like, and so could you.
I mean, wouldn't it become insufferable? No, wouldn't it be insufferable that no one was insufferable, though? That everyone was just perfect? That their responses were always spot on? Wouldn't you, sort of Truman Show-esque, be like, just mess up?
Right. Have you ever watched a movie or read a book that was about a utopian future and didn't think that it was mostly dystopian?
Yeah, I mean, even Utopia, right? It was sort of written to show how awful a utopia would be.
Right. Or like Pleasantville, yeah. Or I don't know if you read The Giver when you were a kid.
I didn't. There was also that TV show, was it Pushing Up Daisy? One of them where it was almost like Groundhog Day over and over,
Right. So Christians will say, well, it's more glorious than you can even imagine. And that's exactly what the Apostle Paul says in Romans 8. And that's an answer of sorts, except that it's not really an answer, because if there's something you're going to experience that's beyond your imagination, then what can you say about it?
Yeah, absolutely nothing.
You can say anything about it.
Right.
You can just say, I hope that's true.
Right.
I don't know what it means, but I hope it's true. And in the absence of not knowing that, then I think that you're left with very few choices. But I think that's the difference between, say, White and The Last of Us that you were talking about, where, man, it brings a tear to your eye just to say, just to hear somebody say, "You're my purpose."
Right.
You're like, what? Knowing that, like, in the light of infinity, if existence is even infinite, it's a whole other question. But in the light of infinity, the universe doesn't care about your little experience.
I mean, not even in the light of infinity. Real quick, it was Bill and Frank, and I kept saying Bill was the Ron Swanson character. Incorrect, it's Frank. So for all the listeners out there who played the video game or watched this special, I apologize. I wanted to give an on-air correction. So the universe doesn't care. I mean, not even infinitely. Like,
yeah.
Even so, if we talk about the solar system or the galaxy, because at some point the only thing that will be visible is the galaxy as the universe expands. So people, like, if aliens exist at that point, or we are sufficiently technologically advanced to go on forever and not go extinct, at some point we will only be able to see our galaxy, and we will think we're the only thing in the universe, which is also trippy to think about. Well, like, the galaxy doesn't care that you exist. The solar system certainly doesn't care that you exist. And right. The Earth, like, tsunamis kill hundreds of thousands of people. And then, like, life just goes on.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah, so you care that you exist.
Yeah, and probably some other people.
Yeah, I mean, I say you, I mean all of us.
Right.
Like, in particular, I mean Bill and Frank, but I think Bill and Frank represent us.
Yes.
Like, we care so much that we exist that we will die for a purpose that the universe doesn't care about.
Yeah. And fight for a purpose that the universe doesn't care about. Right? Like, so, like, when you think of when I think of The Last of Us, why is it better that humans survive over the fungus? Now, I'm pro-human, but in a cold and different universe, if the fungus is better than, right? Like, it's like evolution. Whatever's better survives, or is more fit for the environment, or is it quicker to adapt? And the fungus was quicker to adapt than the humans, and so it won.
Yeah. Yeah, so in the book The Sunset Limited, the other character's name is Black. Which may be slightly problematic, but I think he saves himself. Anyway, that's a rabbit trail. But the other character's name is Black, so it's black and white, because it doesn't really matter what their names are. What matters is what they think. But Black is clearly like the Christian and the theist, who's trying to talk White off the brink of suicide. And the way that he's trying to go about it is basically to convince him that there's good in the world and that God is the source of that good. Spoiler alert, he doesn't end up convincing him of that by the end. But I wonder, like, if he had not taken such a religious route, if he had just, and this is why I'm grateful that you brought up The Last of Us, because there is something remarkable and I think beautiful about that we humans do what Bill and Frank did. That just, like, in defiance of the universe's apathy.
Yeah.
We choose not to be apathetic.
Yeah.
I think that tugs at the heartstrings. That, makes the next moment seem significant.
Yeah, so earlier in the episode, Bill goes to Frank and he's like, I'm going to paint the boutique and fix up the shop. And Frank's like, that's not a great use of our resources. And he's like, this is our home, and I want it to be a home. Mm-hmm. And you're just like, yeah, it's probably not a great use of time or resources, but also, like, it's your home. Like, why decorate? Why clean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had something else and I completely lost it, so I apologize.
We tend to do that when we get in this, like, airy, trippy stuff.
Yeah. No, it was back to. Oh, I know what it was. The religious argument, the theist argument that the good comes from God.
Yeah.
Like, from the moment I deconverted, it boils my blood, because, especially in the Judeo-Christian worldview, more the Christian worldview, we're the ones who cause all the evil and all the bad, right? It's our innate sin or the fall. I know that there's the verses in Isaiah, but most Christians ignore those, that God's the author of evil and destruction. But I think the average evangelical will say evil exists because Adam and Eve sinned, and that gave us all sin. So God doesn't want people to get murdered or sexually assaulted or commit suicide or feel lonely, but that's not on him. And then on the other side of the coin, but all good stuff flows from him, right? And if you're a Calvinist, that's common grace. You could do nothing good on your own, except that God in his common grace allows you to jump on the hand grenade to save your buddies, right? That allows Frank to have a Bill's purpose, even though they're both going to hell because they never converted and they're homosexual and they've killed people and whatever. And so when a theist comes at me with well, there is also good in the world, when I'm looking at the evil exploitation, people starving, hoarding of resources, and they're like, well, God's flowing out the good too. I'm like, how about we give credit to the humans and maybe give God some credit for the bad, because he's the one who, if they exist, either singular or plural, they're the ones who made this mess. So why do they get off the hook for the evil and get all the credit for the good?
Yeah. Well.
So if I were Mr. White, Mr. Black would not have convinced me either.
Well, no. I think that's part of the point of the point of the book. Well, maybe. I think it's an interesting way to interpret it. I was talking with Thomas yesterday, who sent me the book. We were just reflecting on the book, and one of the things we talked about was that about why Black was ultimately unconvincing, but also there's an open question about whether White's in the state of mind that he can be convinced by anything. But I think it's interesting to think about, because there were other approaches available to black. I actually think that the fatal flaw was the thought from the beginning that he could and should save White's soul. Rather than just be kind to him.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
But if you've listened to all 43 episodes of this podcast, then you know that I'm never the scapegoat that Nate throws out when it comes to theism. I mean, I think those kinds of apologetics are lame ducks from the beginning, because if you have to apologize for the creator of the universe on a little podcast in Amherst, that's not much of a god.
Yeah.
You know? I guess that's my perspective, and that I think you and I would both agree that you have to have faith to be a theist. And this is why people have told me multiple times, maybe you have to yourself, that I have a more Hebraic or Judaic vision of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely said that on the podcast.
You go back to we were talking about the afterlife. Like the Judaism is just like maybe there's nothing.
Right.
It's like the real possibility.
Right. Maybe it's the Elysian Fields.
Yeah. The point is, like, God said, live like this, and this is what we as a people have been called to live like.
Yeah.
And that's Judaism in a nutshell. But then, Christianity is related to Judaism and then makes some grand departures. The question of how we got this image of this afterlife is mixed with some Greek Platonism and some development of thought over time. Some would argue it's convenient sort of narrative if you want to use religion for political control. I think there's something to that. If you look at the pages of the Bible...
You leftist Marxist, you.
Yeah. Right. But if you look at the pages of even the New Testament in terms of the afterlife, if you already have this view of heaven and hell, then you can see it everywhere in Matthew to Revelation. But I think if you're truly open, it's really not that much more. It's not that much less vague than the view of the Old Testament, except that Christians had some idea that Jesus was, by his death and resurrection, going to make the earth better. But if you're a student of the Greek, it's going to make the earth better for the next age.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily eternal. Maybe. But the literal Greek translation of, like, eternal life, most of the time in the New Testament, it could legitimately be translated life of the age. The next development, the next age. Like, Jesus is bringing us into a better world. Okay, 2,000 years later, could you argue that it's better than it was when Jesus was here? That's an open question. The point being that if you don't insist on reading like a book like Revelation or the parables of Jesus, if you don't insist on reading them as literal, then you don't end up with anything more concrete than you do from the Old Testament. You end up where Paul ends up, which is the glory that's awaiting us is beyond our imagination. It's not even worth comparing to the suffering that we're suffering now. Which all you can say to that is, I really hope that's true. And I have no idea what it means.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, if you have this interpretation of heaven, you can find it everywhere in Scripture. I also think the apologists like Mr. Black, having not read the book, but what you're describing, those only work if you're in that group. Like, I don't think apologists convince other people outside the Christian bubble to convert. No, people do convert to Christianity, but I don't think it's the appeal to reason or logic that does it, or the apologists' work. I think what the apologist does is they can potentially keep people in the flock who might have wandered away. Or they can reinforce, just like the idea of the evangelical heaven, they can reinforce don't worry, you're going to get, there'll be a new heaven and a new earth, and it'll look exactly like this. And here's the proof. And it does nothing for someone like me, but it may do something for someone in the church I used to pastor to be like, okay, I have cancer now, and I'm probably going to pass away, but I will see Jesus and I'll see my family, right? And it's funny that even a lot of Christians, they'll say they're excited about Jesus, but immediately go to and grandma will greet me at the pearly gates and I'll see, my kitty again. And it's like, are you really excited about singing hymns to the glory of God for eternity? Or do you just miss Graham? And don't want to admit that death is final and sad and you're never going to see this person again.
Yeah. And then, so Thomas, the person who gave me the book, said something interesting to me yesterday. He has a perspective that I don't share. Well, an emotional, not an intellectual one. Like his own experience with depression and suicide and things is much deeper than mine.
Mm-hmm.
He's a Christian. He's an Eastern Orthodox Christian. And he said to me that what convinced him to convert to Christianity was the fear of the unknown. In other words, the fact that it could be true, that because if you really don't know what happens after death, then in his mind there's a 50-50 chance that what the theists are saying is true, that there is something.
Yeah, well, Pascal's wager.
It's sort of like Pascal's wager, right? And I guess when I put it in those terms, I have heard it before, but in terms of why somebody converts, I've never actually thought that could be a reason somebody did convert.
I've actually had a few people in my sphere when I first joined Mercy House, so that was almost their story too.
Yeah.
They woke up one day with existential angst about I don't know what's going to happen. Oh, Christianity says that God's got it. Gonna run that way.
Yeah, what? There's nothing to lose.
Unless Islam is right. That's the problem with Pascal's wager and these sort of, right? You're choosing one. And that means you're excluding 47,000 others. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, it might be better not to choose. Right? Because the choice isn't Christianity or nothing. It's which form of Christianity over Islam, over Jainism, over Hinduism, over Buddhism, all of which have thousands of different variations. And so now your probability isn't 50-50. It's 1 to 100,000. And I would rather stand before God if they exist and be I just didn't know. Rather than I was so sure of this one. And he's you're wrong. On the SATs, you get more points off for answering a question wrong than not answering a question.
Yeah, there's no way of knowing if that's how it works.
Right.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, if I'm gonna roll the dice, I'm gonna roll the dice on evangelical Christianity because that's the worst hell. But the problem is then intellectual honesty.
Yeah.
I think that's the other side of it, and that's sort of what I was trying to say to Thomas yesterday. Was you can't get out of it that easy, because you have to remain true to what you really think. You can't be a Christian unless you truly believe.
Right.
You don't get to just, well, okay, roll the dice, I choose this. There's no going through the motions in Christianity. That's like Christianity 101.
Right. Like if I was reading the Bible every day and praying to God but scoffing the entire time, it wouldn't count.
Yeah, or even like if you were doubting the entire time, or like wrestling the entire time, then the truest thing that you could say about yourself is that either Christianity is a kind of wrestling with God, or that you're not a Christian but a person that wrestles with God.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, in some ways that describes me. Like, my, my position is, I just say to people like you, like, as long as we're both looking at the same abyss, we can have a conversation about God. But if one of us is saying there's definitely no abyss because of this ancient book, and you should turn and repent and not look at the abyss. That's a lot. We talk about the burden of proof. Well, there you go. Right, like
yeah.
There's your burden of proof, and so much of apologetics discussions is a confusion about who has the burden of proof.
Yeah. So we're, believe it or not, starting to come up against the clock.
Yep.
And I want to just sort of at least give my answer, because I said initially, like as I'm listening to the quote, like I agree with a lot of that, and at the end it's like, well, why don't I kill myself? Right? Or why doesn't one? And I think, this is something that apologists and even non-apologists ask atheists, like, why have morality? Why not just kill yourself? Why not do this? And I think, first off, there's a biological reason, right? Like your genes are hardwired to reproduce themselves, not to kill themselves off. And that could be a whole nother philosophical discussion. But I think it almost misses the question of why don't you just off yourself if you don't believe in a God and all you see is evil. I don't see all evil. And all there is this abyss. Why not just end it now? And I think it's akin to the question of like, why is black raspberry ice cream my favorite? I don't know, but it is. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah. It's almost like people demand a rational reason for not doing what is a very irrational thing, ending your own life. But they don't demand a rational reason. Like, even your friend Thomas, he didn't demand a rational reason of Christianity to convert.
Right.
Right? But
Correct.
But I think a lot of theists demand a rational explanation of why you would have this morality. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I like black raspberry ice cream. I don't like pistachio ice cream, although I like pistachios. There's like, at the end of the day, there might not be an answer. And it's like Camus' Sisyphus, right? Why does he keep pushing it up the mountain? Nothing else to do.
Right. Either get crushed by the rock or push it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I have lots of reasons not to self-harm, like kids and a partnership and like lots of lovely things. But at the end of the day, it's just like, I just don't want to. And I can't give you a reason except like I want to wake up tomorrow, have a glass of rosé, and cook some food.
Yeah. and I don't know that. I mean, I think we're just getting at the. Why am I qualifying everything? I think that's true, and I agree with you, and I think, contrary to White, that's what makes life worth living. I think it's a beautiful thing that humans are like that, that we want to live, with purpose, and that sometimes when I say that to people who are in that place where they've completely embraced the nothingness,
yeah,
and they're truly suicidal, then I feel like what I just said to you is just sentimental. You know, that's the question that I'm asking now. Like, am I just giving people empty sentiment, and what does it mean to actually give people something that's real?
Yeah, I mean, from what I struggled with depression and self-harm. We've talked about how my daughter had a suicide attempt this past year. When I was a pastor, there were a few times where I wanted to die. It was like a Job, like, just strike me down. And
yeah.
God didn't steal all my, like, let Satan break all my stuff or whatever. But it was very much like, this is too painful. And so from what I know from people who've survived suicide, and again, speaking generally, they didn't want to die, but they wanted to escape the pain. And a lot of that pain was like the pain of looking into the abyss and not knowing how to at least step back or turn around. So I think, the hope to someone who is contemplating ending their life is that it doesn't have to be as painful as it feels. And you might not believe that, but you can maybe believe others who've been there. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's helpful, but you talk to people who, like, they're survivors from jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge, they're survivors from actually getting hit by trains, and all of them say, like, the biggest regret, like, the people who jump and survive, they were like, the second I jumped, I didn't want to die anymore. Like, right.
Yeah.
But again, like you're saying, like, how do you give non-sentimentality to someone who's desperate?
Or somebody who's just completely convinced, like White, of the nothingness and the abyss.
Yeah.
Like, he's killing himself on principle. Which
it sounds ridiculous, right?
I'm not saying, like, that's... I don't think most people that are suicidal do that. But that's why the book is philosophical and not...
Right.
It's a hypothetical person, and maybe there is somebody out there like White. They're probably... Well, they are rare.
I mean, think about the image of the Buddhist monk lighting themselves on fire.
Right. I'm going to kill myself on principle because living is absurd.
Yeah. And in protest to the pain that life...
In protest to life itself, in order to show everybody that it's absurd. Like, you could think like that. And me and Thomas bat around the question of, it was Christianity's answer to that. And granted, that's a bubble conversation. But it's one that I have to wrestle with if I'm going to continue to call myself a Christian pastor.
Yeah.
It's like, what is Christianity's answer to somebody who says, why not kill yourself? Is it as good as yours? Is it as good as, well, there's raspberry ice cream. You can have that tomorrow instead of being dead. Like, that's a pretty good answer, actually. But do I have a better one because of do I have a better one because of my faith in Jesus? I'll leave us on that cliffhanger.
Sounds good. Well, I'm going to have to pick up the book, and then maybe we have another discussion on it, because it sounds fascinating.
It's a great book.
Do you want to just name the book for any of our listeners who are interested once again?
Yeah, it's called The Sunset Limited.
By
Cormac McCarthy. It's a really short read.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, I look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully next week.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, thanks to our listeners for putting up with the less than stellar audio when we do this, but we really value you and want to make sure that we're putting out content rather than just having random weeks where you don't get a podcast. So,
right.
Any final words besides your cliffhanger?
We love you, and if you're struggling with depression, anxiety, or suicidal thoughts, what's the number?
It is the text is 988. I will also put the phone in there, and there's also a crisis text line that doesn't just deal with suicide, but other crises, and not only just mental health, but I'm overwhelmed, like anxiety, depression. I guess that's all mental health, but I will definitely put those in the show notes. And feel free if you just need somebody to listen or to give an encouraging word. I won't speak for Nate, but I'm available. I am 100% available. Our DMs are open on Facebook, Instagram, our emails on there. Absolutely reach out.
Yep.
All right. Have a great week, everyone.